The phone rang at 2:47 a.m. Not a message, not a notification, not one of those harmless alerts people silence without thinking. This was a call. Loud, sudden, sharp enough to cut through sleep and force a decision before thought could catch up. Whitman Hale opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling of his townhouse just outside Madison, Wisconsin, the sound still echoing in the quiet room. The clock on his nightstand glowed red. 2:47. The world was supposed to be asleep at this hour. Problems were supposed to wait until morning. The phone kept ringing. He turned his head slowly and looked at it. An unfamiliar number. No name, no context. Just digits blinking against the dark. His first instinct was irritation. Who calls this late? Who doesn't leave a message? Who thinks their emergency deserves access to a stranger's night? His hand hovered above the screen. Decline. That was the habit. Unknown numbers didn't belong in his life. His days were structured. His nights were quiet. Everything had a place, and this call did not. The ringing continued. Whitman exhaled through his nose and sat up, running a hand down his face. He told himself he'd answer once, get rid of it, and go back to sleep. Nothing meaningful ever started at 2:47 a.m. He accepted the call. Hello? For a second, there was only breathing on the other end. Shallow, uneven, like someone trying very hard to stay steady. Then a voice spoke. Small, fragile, careful. Hello? I'm sorry. I don't know if I did this right. Whitman's posture changed immediately. The irritation disappeared, replaced by something tighter, something alert. This is Whitman, he said, his voice slower now. Who am I speaking with? The child hesitated. My mommy won't wake up. The words landed all at once. Not loud, not dramatic, not rushed, just honest. Whitman's chest locked. I tried shaking her, the child continued, breath trembling, and I talked to her, and I waited. But she won't open her eyes. Whitman swung his legs off the bed. Okay, he said quickly, grounding his voice. Okay, you did the right thing by calling. You're doing great. The child sniffed. She told me to call this number if something bad happened. That sentence changed everything, because this wasn't a random wrong number anymore. This was intention. Whitman stood, the cold floor biting his feet as he moved toward the window. Outside, the street was empty. Snow rested quietly on parked cars. The world looked untouched, unaware that something inside it had already broken. What's your name? He asked gently. Kofi. Whitman's breath caught. Not because the name was familiar, but because it mattered. All right, Kofi, he said, steady again. I need you to listen to me. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Sir, the word hit him harder than he expected. How old are you? 5. 5. Whitman closed his eyes briefly. 5 years old, alone, awake in the night, holding responsibility no child should carry. Is your mommy breathing? He asked. Yes. But she's not moving. Okay, I'm going to help you. You're not in trouble. You're being very brave. The child let out a quiet sound that might have been relief. Whitman paced the room now, phone pressed to his ear, heart working faster than his thoughts. Where are you right now, Kofi? At home, in the kitchen. Mommy's on the floor. Whitman imagined it without wanting to. The cold tile, the stillness, a small boy standing nearby, unsure of what came next. Do you know your address? The child paused. I can read it from the door. Good. Go ahead. As Kofi read, slowly and carefully, Whitman reached for his laptop with his free hand already opening. Emergency contacts already stepping into a role he didn't remember agreeing to, but could not refuse. Chicago. The word echoed in his mind. Chicago. His jaw tightened. Okay, Kofi, Whitman said once the address was confirmed. I'm calling for help right now. I need you to stay on the phone with me. Can you do that? Yes. Good. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to. As he placed the emergency call, Whitman felt something unfamiliar rising in his chest. Not fear, not panic. Urgency mixed with responsibility, the kind that doesn't ask permission. The operator's voice came through, calm and efficient. Whitman relayed everything, repeating the address, the situation, the child's age. He stayed present with Kofi the entire time, narrating each step so the boy wouldn't feel abandoned. Help is coming, he said, They're on their way. Okay, Kofi whispered. There was a pause. Then the child spoke again. Are you my daddy? The question did not accuse. It did not beg. It simply existed. Whitman stopped pacing. His reflection stared back at him from the dark window. A man in his early 40s, successful, composed, certain of his independence, now frozen by a question he had never prepared to answer. I'm someone your mommy trusted, he said carefully. And right now, that's what matters. Kofi seemed to accept that. She said you were kind, the child added. She said if I was scared, you'd help. Whitman swallowed. Who was this woman? Why did she trust him? Why did her child have his number, memorized, ready for a moment like this? He stayed on the line until the sirens were close enough for Kofi to hear. They're here, the boy said, voice shaking with relief. Good, Whitman replied. You did everything right. I'm proud of you. The call ended shortly after. Whitman lowered the phone slowly. The room felt different now. Smaller. Too quiet. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the screen as if it might explain itself. A child had called him. At 2:47 a.m. because his mother wouldn't wake up. And because somehow his number had been the one written down. Bestie. Before we go any further, tap like and comment I'm here, because this story will change how you see responsibility forever. Whitman didn't know who the mother was yet, but he knew one thing with certainty. That call did not belong to chance, and nothing about his life would be untouched after it. The call had ended, but Whitman didn't move. The phone rested in his hand, screen dark now, heavier than it had any right to be. The silence in the bedroom pressed against his ears, thick and uninvited. Outside, the street remained still, unaware that a line had been crossed inside his chest, one he could not step back over. He stood slowly and walked into the kitchen, setting the phone on the counter as if it might ring again. His mind replayed the child's voice, not the fear in it, but the calm he'd been forced to summon. 5 years old, alone, prepared. Whitman poured himself a glass of water he didn't drink. His reflection stared back at him from the microwave door, eyes sharper now, jaw tight, posture no longer relaxed. This was not how his nights went. This was not how his life worked. He had built it that way. He leaned against the counter, exhaling, when the memory surfaced, uninvited, clear and sudden. Kofi. The name echoed again, but this time it didn't belong to a frightened voice on the phone. It belonged to a conversation from years ago. A small cafe near the South Loop in Chicago, rain tapping softly against the windows. 2 coffee cups between them, forgotten. Zuri had been talking about names. Names matter, she'd said, stirring her drink slowly. They're the first gift you give a child. Whitman had smiled back then, half listening, half admiring the way she spoke with purpose, as if even casual thoughts deserved intention. She'd looked up at him and said, if I ever have a son, I'd want a name that reminds him who he is, where he comes from. Kofi, she'd added after a pause. It means born on Friday. My grandmother used to say Friday children carry resilience. Whitman had repeated it once, tasting the sound of it. Kofi. Zuri had smiled. Now, standing alone in his kitchen years later, Whitman felt the air leave his lungs. His fingers curled against the countertop. That was not coincidence. That was memory reaching forward. He straightened abruptly and picked up his phone, opening his contacts even though he already knew what he was searching for. Zuri Okafor. The name sat there, untouched for years. Not deleted, not blocked. Preserved, like something unfinished. He hadn't spoken to her since the day she'd stopped returning his calls. Since the emails went unanswered. Since her absence settled quietly into permanence. He had told himself she'd moved on. He had told himself it was mutual distance. He had told himself enough stories to live with it. But no story accounted for a 5-year-old child calling him in the middle of the night. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was the hospital. Whitman answered immediately. They told him she was alive, stabilized, transported. They told him where. His keys were in his hand before the call ended. The drive south blurred into motion. Highway lights passed in steady rhythm as his thoughts fractured and reassembled around one undeniable truth. There was a child who knew his voice, a child who trusted him enough to call, a child whose name came from a woman he had once loved carefully, respectfully, without ever knowing how deeply that love would echo. Whitman crossed the state line with the radio off, letting silence accompany him. Every mile stripped something away: distance, denial, the comfort of not knowing. 5 years. 5 years a truth had lived without him, and now it demanded attention. When he finally reached Chicago, dawn was beginning to thin the darkness. The hospital loomed ahead, lights bright against the early sky. Whitman parked and sat in the car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. He wasn't ready, but readiness was no longer required. Inside, the hall smelled clean and sharp. A nurse recognized his name before he could explain himself. That alone told him how deep this moment already ran. "She's asking for you," the nurse said quietly. That was the final blow. Not accusation, not anger, just presence. Whitman walked toward the room, each step measured, controlled, while inside his chest everything collided. A life had been at risk, a truth had been hidden, and a child, Kofi, had bridged 5 years of silence with one brave call. The door opened. Whitman paused at the threshold. Whatever waited on the other side would change him, because this was no longer about a late-night call. It was about what happens when responsibility arrives without warning and refuses to leave. Whitman stood just outside the hospital room, hand resting lightly against the doorframe. He could hear the soft beeping from inside. Slow, steady, proof of life. Proof that the call at 2:47 a.m. had not ended in loss, but it had ended in truth. He didn't go in right away, because once he crossed that threshold, there would be no pretending this was temporary. No framing this as a favor done in the middle of the night. No returning to a version of life where he only answered for himself. A woman he once loved lay inside that room. A child he had never met had trusted him with everything. And between those two realities sat 5 years of unanswered questions. Why had Zuri disappeared? Why had she carried pregnancy, birth, and motherhood alone without ever reaching out again? Why had she chosen silence over certainty? Whitman's mind returned to the sound of Kofi's voice, clear despite fear, polite despite panic. That voice had not learned composure by accident. It had been taught, carefully, repeatedly, by a mother who believed preparation was love, which meant Zuri hadn't vanished because she was careless. She had vanished because she was deliberate. That realization shifted something. People don't hide truths like that out of indifference. They hide them because they believe they are protecting something, someone, from harm they can already imagine. Whitman exhaled slowly. If Zuri had stayed away, it wasn't because she didn't trust him. It was because she didn't trust the world he came from, to receive her child without conditions. That was the question he hadn't asked back then. That was the fear he hadn't seen. And now, one phone call had forced all of it into the open. Bestie, this is where the real story begins, not with drama, but with consequence. Because this isn't just about a man answering a late-night call. It's about what happens when responsibility arrives without an invitation. It's about the quiet strength of a woman who chose community over comfort. It's about a child who was taught that asking for help is not weakness. And it's about a truth that waited 5 years for the right moment to speak. As Whitman finally pushed the door open and stepped inside, he understood something he hadn't before. Love doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits patiently, trusting that when it's needed most, it will be heard. In the hours that follow, you'll see why Zuri chose distance instead of disclosure. You'll understand the weight of raising a child while guarding his sense of belonging. You'll witness how two people from different worlds begin learning each other again, not through promises, but through presence. And you'll see how one brave phone call can redraw an entire family line. Because this story isn't about blame, it's about growth. It's about what changes when silence finally gives way to truth. And before we go any further, bestie, subscribe now, because stories like this don't just entertain, they teach. They teach us that strength doesn't always look loud, that community can save lives, that children remember what we model, and that showing up, even late, is still showing up. Whitman took another step forward. The door closed behind him, and with that sound, the past stopped waiting. Chicago woke slowly, not with noise, but with movement. A bus hissing as it pulled to the curb, a delivery truck rumbling down the block, a neighbor's door opening, then closing again. The city didn't rush Zuri Okafor. It moved alongside her, familiar with her rhythm, respectful of her pace. Her apartment sat on the 3rd floor of a brick building on the south side. Not large, not new, but warm in the ways that mattered. The living room held mismatched furniture collected over time. The walls carried framed photos, church flyers, handwritten notes, and one carefully taped drawing that leaned slightly to the left. A stick figure woman, a smaller stick figure boy, both smiling. Zuri stood barefoot in the kitchen, tying her head wrap as the kettle whistled. Morning light slipped through the window, resting gently on the counter. She turned off the stove and poured hot water into a mug, the smell of tea filling the space. "Kofi," she called softly, not needing to raise her voice. "You up?" A door creaked down the short hallway. "Yes, Mama." He padded in wearing socks that didn't match. One blue, one gray. He rubbed his eyes with the back of his hands and leaned against her leg without asking. Zuri smiled down at him. "Good morning, handsome." "Morning," he said, then tilted his head. "Is today a school day or a work day?" She laughed quietly. "Both." He groaned dramatically. "That's too much." She nudged him gently with her knee. "Go brush your teeth." He didn't move. "Kofi, I'm thinking about it." She raised an eyebrow. He grinned and ran down the hallway. This was their routine. No rush, no yelling, no chaos, just steady movement shaped by repetition and trust. By the time Kofi returned, Zuri had scrambled eggs on the stove and toast warming. She set a plate in front of him, cut neatly, portions just right. "Numbers first," she said. Kofi climbed onto his chair and swung his legs. "Again?" "Yes, again." He sighed but didn't argue. Zuri held up 3 fingers. "What's this?" 3. She held up 5. "And this?" 5. She smiled. "Good. Now tell me what to do if you're scared." Kofi didn't hesitate. "I breathe slow," he said, placing a hand on his chest. "I don't hide. I ask for help. And if I don't answer right away, I keep trying," he said. "And I don't panic." Zuri nodded. "Exactly." She didn't explain why. She never framed these lessons as fear-based. She taught preparation as care, as confidence, as something every child deserved. After breakfast, Zuri braided Kofi's hair at the kitchen table. He sat still, humming softly to himself while she worked with practiced hands. "What are you singing?" she asked. "The song Auntie Nia plays in the car." She chuckled. "You're off key." "I know." She finished and kissed the top of his head. "You ready?" He hopped down. "Ready." They stepped outside together, the building door closing behind them with a familiar click. The sidewalk was busy now. Neighbors nodded. A woman pushing a stroller waved. Someone called out Zuri's name from across the street. "Church on Sunday?" the woman asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Zuri replied. Community wasn't something she searched for. It was already there. At school drop-off, Kofi hugged her tightly before running toward the entrance. "Love you forever," she called after him. He turned back. "Love you always." Zuri watched until he disappeared inside before turning away. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. Work. She adjusted her bag and headed toward the train. Throughout the day, Zuri moved with purpose. At the community health center, she greeted patients by name, remembered stories, listened without rushing. She answered phones, handled paperwork, translated when needed. Her tone never changed, calm, respectful, present. On her lunch break, she called Kofi's school. "Just checking in," she said simply. "He's doing great," the teacher replied. "Very focused." Zuri closed her eyes briefly, relief, quiet, and earned. After work, she picked Kofi up, stopping by the grocery store on the way home. He helped carry bags, proud of the responsibility. At home, homework came before play. "Read it out loud," Zuri said, sitting across from him. He stumbled over a word. "Take your time," she encouraged. "You're not racing," he corrected himself, and kept going. Dinner was simple. Conversation wasn't. "What made you laugh today?" she asked. Kofi thought. When Malik tried to sit on the wrong chair, she laughed. "That'll do it." Later, as night settled, Zuri tucked Kofi into bed. She smoothed the blanket, kissed his cheek, and brushed his hair back gently. "You know you can always talk to me," she said. "I know. And if I'm not right there, I still talk," he replied. "I just find help." She smiled. "That's my boy." She turned off the light and closed the door halfway, leaving the hall lamp on. Zuri leaned against the wall for a moment after. Motherhood came first. Before work, before rest, before anything else, and she carried it with quiet strength, never asking for applause, only giving what she believed mattered most. Zuri's day didn't end when the clinic doors closed. At 4:30 p.m., she logged out of the system, straightened the stack of files on her desk, and slid her chair in with care. Around her, co-workers stretched, chatted about dinner plans, complained lightly about traffic. Zuri smiled when spoken to, nodded when needed, but her mind was already moving ahead. There was another place that needed her. She stepped outside into the late afternoon air, pulling her coat tighter as she walked toward the bus stop. Her phone buzzed. "Kofi, Mama, are you coming now?" She typed back quickly. "Zuri, I'm on my way to Auntie Nia's. I'll see you later tonight. Did you finish your reading?" A moment passed. "Kofi, yes. I read it twice." Zuri smiled as the bus pulled up. She didn't explain to him why she worked evenings. She never framed it as sacrifice. In her home, work wasn't hardship. It was responsibility handled with dignity. The rehabilitation clinic sat farther west, quieter than the health center, tucked between a pharmacy and a small grocery store. Inside, the lighting was soft, the voices lower. Recovery lived here. Patients lived here. Zuri tied her badge around her neck and greeted the evening staff. "Evening, Zuri," a nurse called. "Evening," Zuri replied. "How's Mr. Alvarez?" "Better today." "Asking for you." Zuri nodded and headed down the hall. Mr. Alvarez sat in a wheelchair near the window, hands folded, staring outside. When he saw her, his shoulders relaxed. "You came," he said. "I said I would," Zuri replied, kneeling slightly to meet his eye level. "How's the leg feeling?" He shrugged. "Better. Still slow." "Slow is still forward," she said gently. She helped him through his exercises, counting aloud with him, adjusting when he tired. She never rushed, never sighed, never made him feel like time was being taken from somewhere else. In the break room later, she sipped water and checked her phone. A missed call from Auntie Nia. She called back immediately. "He's good," Nia said. "Ate everything. Tried to teach my cat how to count." Zuri laughed softly. "I'll pick him up after my shift." "You're running yourself thin," Nia added, not accusing, just noticing. Zuri leaned against the counter. "I'm fine." "I know," Nia said. "I just want you to be okay too." Zuri paused. "I'm okay. I have a plan." That was always her answer. At 9:45 p.m., she clocked out and thanked the staff before heading back into the night. The bus ride felt longer now. Her shoulders ached. Her feet reminded her of every step she'd taken since sunrise. Still, when she reached Nia's place, she smiled easily. Kofi ran to her. "Mama." She knelt and hugged him tightly. "You ready to go home?" "Yes," he said, then quieter. "Did you have work again?" "Yes." He looked at her face carefully, as if checking for something. "Are you tired?" Zuri considered lying. Then she shook her head. "A little. But I'm happy." That was true. At home, she reheated food while Kofi talked about his day. She listened fully, responding with questions, laughing at the right moments. When he yawned, she guided him toward bed. "Teeth," she reminded. "I know." She watched him brush, then tucked him in, repeating the same routine she always did. Same order, same calm. Later, alone in the kitchen, Zuri sat at the table with a notebook open. Numbers filled the page. Rent, utilities, groceries, school supplies. She checked each line twice. Her phone buzzed again. A message from the rehab clinic supervisor. "Supervisor, we appreciate you, Zuri. Patients respond well to you." She stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "Zuri, thank you. I'm glad to help." No exclamation points, no celebration, just purpose. Zuri didn't work 2 jobs because she was desperate. She worked them because she was determined. Because stability wasn't something she waited for. It was something she built, hour by hour, choice by choice. And every night, no matter how late, she showed up for the one person who mattered most. There were rules in Zuri Okafor's home. Not loud ones, not written ones, but steady ones, built into the flow of their days the same way breathing was built into their bodies. One of those rules lived in her purse. Folded once, then again. Smooth from handling. Never forgotten. Kofi noticed it one afternoon when he was 4. They were sitting at the small kitchen table, crayons scattered between them, paper already filled with uneven letters and shapes. Zuri was sorting mail, moving carefully through envelopes with practiced attention. Kofi leaned forward, curious. "Mama, what's that paper you always put back?" Zuri paused. She didn't rush her answer. She reached into her purse and pulled out the folded card, placing it flat on the table between them. "This?" she asked. Kofi nodded. "You never throw it away." She smiled slightly. "Because it's important." He tilted his head. "Is it a secret?" "No," she said gently. "It's preparation." She unfolded the paper. A name. A phone number. Nothing else. Kofi squinted at it. "Whose number?" Zuri rested her elbows on the table. "Someone I trust." Kofi looked up at her. "Like Auntie Nia?" "Different," Zuri said. "But yes, like that." She slid the paper closer to him. "I want you to know this number." Kofi's eyes widened. "Right now?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because sometimes," Zuri said calmly, "grown-ups need help too." She watched him closely as she spoke. Not for fear, she never taught through fear, but for understanding. "If something happens," she continued, "and I can't answer you right away, I don't want you to feel alone." Kofi's brow furrowed. "You're always there." "I know," she said softly. "And I plan to be. This is just in case." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words the way children do, without overthinking, but without dismissing them. She pointed to the first number. "Read it." He stumbled at first. She corrected him patiently. They read it together. Once, twice, 3 times. Again, she said, not stern, certain. By the 5th repetition, he smiled proudly. "I know it." "Good," Zuri replied. "Now tell me what you do before you call." Kofi straightened his shoulders. "I breathe. And after, I speak clearly." "And what do you say first?" "My name," he answered. "And that I need help." Zuri nodded. She didn't tell him why this mattered. She didn't tell him who the number belonged to. She didn't explain the weight behind it. Because this lesson wasn't about history. It was about confidence. From that day forward, it became routine. Not daily. Not obsessive. Just present. Sometimes she'd ask while they waited for the bus, "Kofi, what's the number?" He'd recite it without hesitation. Sometimes she'd ask while braiding his hair, "And if you're scared?" "I don't hide," he'd answer. "I call." She corrected him once. Gently. "You don't call because you're scared," she said. "You call because you're smart." He liked that better. As the years passed, the lesson grew with him. Zuri never dramatized emergencies. She never spoke of worst-case outcomes. She focused on skills, reading addresses, recognizing landmarks, knowing the difference between panic and urgency. "This is our building," she'd say while pointing outside. "What color is the door?" "Green." "And the number?" He'd recite it. At bedtime, after prayers and stories, she sometimes added one more question. "If Mama doesn't answer right away, what do you do?" "I keep trying," Kofi said every time. "And I don't get quiet." Zuri always smiled at that. She had learned early that silence was dangerous. She had learned that preparation was protection. And she had learned that love didn't always look like closeness. It sometimes looked like foresight. The paper stayed in her purse. Always. Even on days when she was exhausted. Even on days when life felt stable enough to forget why she carried it. She never assumed tomorrow would behave. She taught Kofi not to assume either. One evening, after a long day, Kofi watched her tuck the paper back into her purse again. "Mama," he asked, "do you think I'll ever need it?" Zuri met his eyes. "I hope not," she said honestly. "But knowing how to use it means you'll be okay either way." He accepted that, because she had taught him to trust preparation, not fear it. Years later, without warning, without rehearsal, that lesson would rise up when nothing else could. Not as panic, not as confusion, but as memory. A small hand reaching for a number because a mother once believed teaching was an act of love. Bestie, pause here for just a moment. Comment if someone ever prepared you for life in ways you didn't understand until later. Zuri never knew the night would come, but she made sure her son would know what to do if it did. Whitman Hale lived in a townhouse just outside Madison, Wisconsin, the kind built for people who valued predictability. Neutral colors, clean lines, nothing excessive. The lawn was trimmed on schedule. The snow cleared before sunrise. Packages were brought inside within minutes of delivery. Neighbors waved politely, rarely stopping long enough to exchange details. Whitman liked it that way. His mornings followed a pattern so consistent it rarely required thought. Alarm at 5:45. Shower. Coffee. Black. No sugar. News headlines skimmed, never lingered on. Shoes lined up by the door, always facing the same direction. Control didn't feel rigid to him. It felt safe. By 7:15, he was on the road, hands steady on the steering wheel as he merged onto the highway. He preferred the quiet of early hours before the roads filled and conversations began. Silence was not empty to him. It was space, something earned. At work, Whitman was respected, not because he demanded attention, but because he never wasted it. He spoke when necessary, listened more than he responded. Meetings moved faster when he was in the room. Decisions were made cleanly. Disagreements never escalated. They dissolved under calm reasoning. Whitman doesn't get rattled, one colleague once said. That was true. He had been raised not to. Growing up, the Hale household ran on order. His parents believed emotions were private things, meant to be processed quietly and resolved efficiently. Displays were discouraged. Questions were answered carefully, if at all. When Whitman was 10 and fell from his bike, scraping his knee badly, his father hadn't rushed toward him. He had stood at the edge of the driveway and said, "Get up, assess the damage, then we'll fix it." Whitman had done exactly that. Crying didn't stop the bleeding. Calm did. His mother was affectionate in her own way, meals cooked precisely, clothes pressed, reminders given gently but firmly. Love in their home was measured through provision and consistency, not through emotional overflow. Strong people don't need to be loud, she often said. Whitman absorbed that belief deeply. By adulthood, silence had become his shield. When problems arose, he handled them internally. When relationships became complicated, he withdrew just enough to regain balance. He didn't confront unless necessary. He didn't chase clarity if distance could provide peace. Silence felt safer than vulnerability. That instinct had guided him for years, including when Zuri disappeared. From the outside, his life appeared complete. A solid career, a clean home, financial stability, respectable routines, no chaos. Inside, he kept everything compartmentalized. Work stayed at work. The past stayed in the past. Emotions stayed contained. Until the night the phone rang. But before that night, before the call, Whitman had convinced himself his way of living was not only functional but correct. On weekends, he grocery shopped early, avoiding crowds. He cleaned as he went. Laundry folded immediately. Emails answered promptly, then archived. There was comfort in closure. There were no children's toys on his floor, no artwork on his fridge, no interruptions to his schedule. Just quiet. And in that quiet, he rarely revisited unanswered questions. Not because they didn't matter, but because silence allowed them to rest without demanding resolution. He hadn't deleted Zuri's contact. He told himself it was habit. He hadn't followed up when she stopped responding. He told himself it was respect. In truth, it was control. Control over disappointment, control over rejection, control over emotions that didn't fit neatly into his life. His parents had taught him that unanswered things didn't need to be pursued endlessly. Some things simply ended, or so he believed. At family gatherings, conversations stayed polite and surface level. Career updates, travel plans, mutual acquaintances. No one asked Whitman why he wasn't married. No one pressed him about children. That kind of curiosity didn't exist in the Hale family. Privacy was protection. When he lay in bed at night before the call, Whitman believed his life was balanced, not joyful, not lonely, balanced. And balance to him was success. But silence had a cost. It insulated him from pain, but it also distanced him from connection. He had learned to step back rather than step forward, to wait rather than ask, to let time settle things instead of naming them. That was why Zuri's absence had gone unchallenged. That was why years had passed without truth, because silence felt safer than confronting what he might hear. And now, standing on the other side of that late-night call, Whitman was beginning to understand something he had never questioned before. Control can protect you, but it can also keep you from becoming who you were meant to be. Whitman didn't fall for Zuri Okafor in a dramatic way. There was no instant certainty, no sweeping declaration, no moment he could point to and say, that was it. What drew him in was how she listened. They had met during a civic partnership initiative in Chicago, a joint effort between private donors and community organizations to improve access to local health resources. Whitman had been assigned as a financial liaison. Zuri represented the community health center. Their first meeting took place in a modest conference room downtown. Folding chairs, coffee gone lukewarm, a whiteboard filled with notes from earlier sessions. Zuri spoke calmly, confidently, without padding her points. "We don't need another short-term solution," she said, addressing the room. "We need systems that people can rely on without explaining themselves every time they walk in." Whitman had looked up from his notes then. "Can you clarify what you mean by systems?" he asked. She met his eyes without hesitation. Consistency, staffing, trust. People don't heal when they feel temporary. There was no edge in her voice. No challenge, just clarity. After the meeting, Whitman found himself walking beside her toward the elevators. "You're very direct," he said. Zuri smiled slightly. "I don't have time to be vague." He nodded. "I appreciate that." Their conversations grew naturally from there. Emails first, efficient, focused, then phone calls that ran a little longer than scheduled. They spoke about budgets and staffing needs, but also about the people behind the numbers. Zuri knew their names, their routines, their worries. Whitman noticed how carefully she spoke about others, never exaggerating need, never diminishing it either. One evening, after a long planning session, they walked together along the sidewalk outside the building. "You don't talk much about yourself," Zuri observed. Whitman considered that. "I've never found it necessary." She tilted her head. "You don't think people need context?" "I think results matter more," he replied. She smiled. "We see things differently. Is that a problem?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's honest." Their relationship developed in moments like that. Quiet exchanges, thoughtful pauses, respect without performance. Whitman never tried to impress her. He showed up prepared, on time, consistent. When Zuri spoke, he listened fully. When she disagreed, he didn't interrupt. He adjusted. She noticed. One afternoon during a site visit, Zuri watched him speak with a group of volunteers. He didn't overtake the conversation. He asked questions, took notes, stepped back. Later, she said, "You don't center yourself." He shrugged. "I don't believe in occupying space unnecessarily." She laughed softly. "That's rare." They began sharing meals between meetings. Nothing elaborate. Sandwiches, coffee, a small diner near the clinic where the waitress remembered Zuri's order. During one lunch, Zuri asked, "Why do you do this work?" Whitman answered honestly, "Because resources should go where they're effective." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not what I asked." He paused. "Because I don't like waste." She shook her head. "You still didn't answer." He thought for a moment. "Because stability matters. I grew up with it. I believe everyone deserves it." Zuri nodded. "That's better." Whitman learned her habits quickly. She wrote lists. She checked details twice. She never dismissed concerns, no matter how small. He learned her values too. Community over isolation. Preparation over reaction. Dignity without spectacle. What he felt for her built quietly. He never positioned himself as a solution. He never assumed she needed saving. In fact, he admired how little she asked for help, and how carefully she offered it. One night, after a long day, they stood outside her apartment building. The city hummed around them, lights reflecting off passing cars. "You don't owe me anything," Zuri said suddenly. Whitman looked at her. "I never thought you did." She held his gaze. "I need you to understand that." "I do," he replied. That was how he loved her. Without claims, without control, without expectation. When the relationship deepened, it did so with intention. He met her friends, listened more than he spoke, never corrected, never condescended. He saw how she navigated her world, with boundaries, with care, with pride, and he loved her for it. When she pulled away later, when calls went unanswered, when space replaced presence, Whitman didn't pursue explanation aggressively. He sent one message, then another, then he waited, not because he didn't care, but because his love had always respected autonomy. Silence to him meant a choice had been made, and he believed in honoring choices, even when they hurt. That was the cost of loving quietly. Whitman never learned about the pregnancy, not through a message, not through a mutual friend, not through a passing rumor that reached him sideways. He learned nothing at all. At first, The silence felt temporary. Zuri had always been deliberate. She took time to think. She weighed words carefully. When she didn't respond immediately, Whitman assumed she was busy, grounded, in work, anchored in responsibility the same way she always had been. He sent a message. Just checking in. Hope you're well. Days passed. He sent another. Let me know if you want to talk. Still nothing. Weeks moved by quietly, settling into months. Whitman reread old conversations without searching for blame. He looked for signals, something he might have missed, a moment where things had shifted without him noticing. There was none. The absence had no explanation attached to it. For someone like Whitman, that mattered. He believed in informed decisions, in consent, in clarity. He believed people should be allowed to choose what they were stepping into, but silence removed choice. And silence, once established, began to shape its own reality. Whitman considered reaching out through mutual contacts. He decided against it. Zuri had always valued boundaries. He wasn't going to cross hers simply to satisfy uncertainty. That restraint cost him more than he knew. Had he known she was carrying a child, he would have shown up. Not loudly, not possessively, not with demands, but with presence. He would have asked what she needed. He would have listened before speaking. He would have made room in his carefully structured life without hesitation. That was the truth he would not allow himself to imagine, because imagining it without confirmation felt like intrusion. So he stayed quiet, and in that quiet, years passed. Whitman moved forward with his life as it was presented to him. Work continued, days filled, seasons changed. There were moments, rare, unplanned, when he thought of Zuri, when something she once said surfaced unexpectedly, when a name caught his attention, when he passed a park and noticed a child learning to ride a bike. He never lingered there. He believed unresolved things were best left undisturbed unless invited back. He didn't know that Zuri's silence was not rejection. It was protection. She had made a decision without consulting him, not because she didn't respect him, but because she didn't want her child navigating two worlds without certainty of belonging. She had chosen preparation over negotiation, and in doing so, she had removed Whitman from the equation entirely. That removal came with consequences on both sides. For Zuri, it meant carrying everything alone. For Whitman, it meant being denied a role he would have accepted willingly. The cost of silence wasn't just time. It was memory. First steps he didn't witness. First words he didn't hear. Questions he never answered. A relationship he never got the chance to define. When the phone rang at 2:47 a.m., all of that absence collapsed into the present. The truth arrived fully formed, without warning, without preparation. A 5-year-old child did not give him time to adjust. A hospital did not ask him to reflect. Reality demanded response. And for the first time, Whitman understood what silence had taken from him, not as punishment, but as consequence. It wasn't that Zuri had denied him out of malice. It was that fear had been allowed to decide in his absence. And now, standing at the edge of something irreversible, Whitman faced the weight of a choice he had never been offered, not whether to be involved, but whether he could rise to responsibility that arrived late and still matter. He didn't know yet how to bridge the distance. He didn't know what forgiveness would look like. But he knew this. Being excluded from the beginning did not excuse absence from the future. And if he was being invited into this child's life now, by circumstance, by trust, by one brave call, he would not answer with hesitation. Because some choices come late, but they still demand everything. That night began like every other. No warning, no sense of interruption, just routine settling gently into place. Zuri unlocked the apartment door a little after 8:30 p.m., the familiar click echoing softly through the hallway. The air inside carried the faint scent of lemon cleaner from earlier that morning. She set her bag down by the door, slipped off her shoes, and rolled her shoulders once to release the stiffness she carried home with her. "Kofi," she called, already knowing where he was. "In my room." His voice answered back. She walked down the hallway, peeking into his room to find him sitting, cross-legged on the floor, puzzle pieces spread out in front of him. "Homework done?" she asked. "Yes," he said, without looking up. "I checked it twice." She smiled. "I believe you." Zuri went back into the kitchen and set about reheating dinner. Nothing special. Rice, vegetables, leftover chicken she'd seasoned earlier in the week. The microwave hummed softly as she leaned against the counter, scrolling briefly through her phone. No missed calls. No messages that needed answering. The quiet felt earned. "Kofi," she called again. "Wash your hands." He padded in obediently, reaching up to the sink with practiced effort. Zuri watched him for a moment, noting how tall he'd gotten without her noticing. Children grew like that, quietly, steadily, between ordinary days. They sat at the table together. "How was school?" she asked. "Good," he said. "We learned about shapes." "Which ones?" "All of them." She laughed softly. "That's impressive." After dinner, Kofi read aloud from his book while Zuri wiped down the counter. He stumbled once, paused, corrected himself without looking up. "Nice," she said. He beamed. By 9:30, she guided him through his bedtime routine. Pajamas. Teeth brushed. Lights dimmed. She tucked him in, smoothing the blanket the way she always did. "I love you forever," she whispered. "Love you always," he replied, already drifting. Zuri closed the door halfway and stood there for a moment longer than usual, listening to his breathing even out. Then she turned back toward the kitchen. Her body felt heavy in a way she couldn't quite name. Not pain, just weight. She poured herself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, pressing her palm flat against the cool surface. She told herself she was tired, that 2 jobs would do that to anyone. She took a sip. The glass slipped from her hand. It shattered on the floor. Zuri blinked, startled more by the sound than anything else. She bent down instinctively to clean it up, and that was when her knees gave out. There was no cry, no dramatic fall, just a sudden loss of balance, like a switch had been flipped. She hit the floor hard, her shoulder taking most of the impact. For a second she lay there, breath knocked from her lungs, staring at the underside of the table. Her mind tried to catch up. Get up, she thought. Her body didn't respond. Her fingers twitched once, then nothing. Down the hall, Kofi stirred. He called out softly, half asleep. "Mama." No answer. A minute passed, then another. He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes. "Mama." He called again, louder now. Still nothing. He slid out of bed and walked into the hallway, bare feet padding against the floor. The kitchen light was still on. That felt wrong. He stepped closer. Zuri lay on the floor, one arm bent beneath her, hair fanned slightly across the tile. Her eyes were closed. Her chest moved slowly, steadily, but she did not respond. Kofi froze. "Mama," he said, kneeling beside her. He touched her shoulder, lightly. "Mama, wake up." She didn't. His breathing sped up. He shook her gently, just like she'd taught him not to panic. "Mama." Nothing. Fear rose quickly, sharp and disorienting, but something else rose with it. Memory. Training. He remembered what she'd said. "Breathe." He placed his hand on his chest, just like she'd shown him. In, out. He tried again. "Mama, please wake up." Her body remained still. He stood up and backed away slowly, eyes never leaving her face. His heart pounded so hard it hurt, but he didn't scream. He didn't hide. He didn't run. He did exactly what she had prepared him to do. He walked to her purse, still hanging by the door. He opened it carefully, and searched. Kofi stood by the door with his mother's purse open in front of him. His hands were shaking. He noticed that first, not the sound of his heartbeat, not the tightness in his throat, but the way his fingers trembled as he moved aside a wallet, a set of keys, a small notebook. Fear wanted to rush him. Fear wanted to push him into noise. But fear didn't get to lead. "Breathe," he whispered to himself. He placed his hand on his chest the way his mother had shown him, the way they practiced while waiting for the bus, the way they practiced before spelling tests. In, out. He found the folded card. It was exactly where it always was. Kofi picked it up carefully, unfolding it with slow, deliberate movements. The numbers stared back at him, familiar and steady. He didn't smile. He didn't feel proud. He felt ready. He walked back toward the kitchen, stopping a few feet away from his mother. He looked at her again, checking the way her chest rose and fell. She was breathing. That mattered. "Okay," he said quietly, not to her, but to himself. "Okay." He went to the small table by the couch where the house phone sat. Zuri didn't like relying only on cell phones. She'd explained it simply. "Batteries die," she'd said once. "Wires don't forget." Kofi climbed onto the chair and lifted the receiver with both hands. It felt heavy. He placed it against his ear the way he'd practiced, resting his elbow on the table to keep it steady. He dialed, one number at a time, not fast, not slow, careful. He paused between each one, checking the card, checking his memory. When the last digit was entered, he pressed call. The ringing began. Each sound felt louder than the last. He counted them quietly in his head. 1, 2, 3. His chest tightened. What if no one answered? What if tried to creep in? He pushed it back. 4, 5. Then a voice. Hello? Kofi swallowed. This was the part his mother had prepared him for. He didn't cry. He didn't explain everything at once. He spoke clearly. Hello, I'm sorry. I don't know if I did this right. There was a pause. The voice on the other end sounded different now. Alert, listening. My mommy won't wake up, Kofi said. She's on the floor. Silence followed, not empty, but focused. Okay, the man said calmly. You did the right thing by calling. What's your name? Kofi. And how old are you, Kofi? 5. Good, the man said. I need you to stay with me. Can you do that? Yes. Kofi nodded, even though the man couldn't see him. He held the phone tighter. She told me to call this number if something bad happened, Kofi added, because that felt important. Because his mother had said preparation mattered. You listened, the man replied. That was very smart. Kofi felt his shoulders drop slightly. Not because the fear was gone, but because he wasn't alone with it anymore. Is your mommy breathing? The man asked. Yes, Kofi answered quickly. Slow. But she is. That's good. You're doing a great job. The man's voice stayed steady the entire time. That helped. Kofi answered every question carefully. Where are you? What's your address? Is anyone else home? He walked to the door and read the address from the sign, sounding out each number slowly. He didn't rush. He didn't guess. Help is coming, the man told him. I'm calling for them right now. Stay on the phone with me. Okay. Kofi sat on the floor near the couch, phone still pressed to his ear. He kept his eyes on the kitchen, on his mother. He didn't touch her again. She had taught him that too. Can you tell me what you see around you? The man asked. Kofi described the kitchen table, the chair that had fallen over, the broken glass on the floor. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to, the man said. Sirens sounded faintly in the distance. Kofi looked toward the window. I hear something, he said. That's them, the man replied. They're coming to help your mommy. Kofi felt tears rise then, but they didn't fall. He stayed on the line until there was a knock at the door. Someone's here, Kofi said. Good, the man replied. Open the door for them. I'm proud of you. Kofi set the phone down carefully, just like his mother had taught him, and ran to the door. Adults filled the space quickly after that. Voices. Movement. Purpose. Someone knelt beside him. You did great, they told him. Kofi nodded. He believed them, because his mother had prepared him not just to survive the moment, but to trust himself inside it. Whitman didn't wait for permission. The moment the emergency operator confirmed help was en route, something inside him shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. The phone remained pressed to his ear as he listened to Kofi's breathing steady on the other end. Each small response from the child anchored him to the present. You're not alone, Whitman said again, not as reassurance, but as instruction. I'm here. When the call ended, Whitman stood still for half a second, phone lowered, the quiet of his townhouse pressing in around him. The walls felt closer than they had minutes earlier. The order he relied on, the neat counters, the aligned shoes, the predictable stillness, no longer offered comfort. It felt irrelevant. He moved with purpose, not panic. Keys, wallet, jacket. The routine took over, but the intention behind it was new. This wasn't control for its own sake. This was direction. As he stepped outside, the cold air sharpened his focus. He locked the door without looking back and crossed the driveway, engine starting on the first turn. The dashboard clock read 2:58 a.m. Chicago was hours away. He didn't calculate the time. He didn't weigh the inconvenience. He didn't consider what he would say when he arrived. Those questions belonged to later. Right now, movement mattered. The highway opened ahead of him, lanes stretching into darkness. Whitman set the cruise control higher than usual and kept both hands on the wheel. The radio stayed off. Silence, for once, wasn't a refuge. It was a canvas his thoughts refused to leave blank. He replayed the call, the way Kofi had spoken. Clear, polite, focused. A child that young didn't develop composure by accident. That composure had been taught. Whitman felt a tightness in his chest. Not fear, not regret, but recognition. Zuri had built a world where preparation stood in for protection. She had done what he was trained to do, anticipate risk and reduce harm, but she had done it with tenderness. He crossed the state line without noticing, the sign passing in his peripheral vision. His mind stayed fixed on the kitchen floor in Chicago, on a woman lying still, on a child sitting upright because he had been trained not to collapse into fear. Whitman understood something then that he hadn't before. Control was not the same as responsibility. Control kept his life orderly. Responsibility demanded response, and responsibility had arrived without warning. His phone buzzed on the console. He glanced down at a message from an unknown number, a hospital update. Brief, clinical, stable, for now. He exhaled slowly. Stable meant time. Time meant opportunity. The road hummed beneath the tires as Whitman drove. He thought of the last time he'd been in Chicago with purpose. The meetings, the long walks, the conversations that ended without closure. He hadn't returned since Zuri stopped answering. That absence had been framed as final. Now it wasn't. As the city lights came into view, Whitman's posture shifted. He rolled his shoulders back, steadying himself. This was not a reunion. It was not a confrontation. It was a response. He pulled into the hospital parking structure just before dawn, the sky lightening at the edges. Inside, the air smelled clean and sharp. The floor reflected overhead lights, each step echoing softly as he moved forward. At the desk, he gave his name. The nurse looked up, checked the screen, then nodded. "She's in treatment," she said. "And the child, Kofi, is with staff." "He's doing well." Whitman nodded once. "Thank you." As he walked down the hallway, he noticed his breathing, slow, controlled. This was familiar territory. Not because he'd been here before, but because pressure clarified him. He didn't need to rehearse emotions to act responsibly. He reached the waiting area where Kofi sat with a hospital staff member, swinging his legs gently. When he saw Whitman, he stopped. The boy studied him, with the same careful attention he'd used on the phone. "You came," Kofi said. "Yes," Whitman replied, kneeling so they were eye level. "I said I would." Kofi nodded, satisfied. "They're helping my mommy," he said. "I know," Whitman answered. "You helped them help her?" Kofi considered that, then leaned back in his chair. The crisis had passed its most urgent point. His body knew it before his mind did. Whitman stood as a doctor approached, speaking in calm, measured tones. Information was shared, next steps outlined. Nothing promised, nothing hidden. Whitman listened. This was where his instincts aligned with necessity. He asked questions, clarified timelines, took notes. He did not interrupt. He did not demand. When the doctor finished, Whitman thanked them. He sat back down near Kofi, keeping a respectful distance while remaining present. The boy picked at the edge of his sleeve. "Can I see her?" Kofi asked. "Soon," Whitman said. "They're making sure she's okay." Kofi nodded again. Trust came easily to him, not because the world had been gentle, but because he had been taught how to navigate it. Whitman looked down the hallway toward the room where Zuri was being treated. He hadn't seen her yet. He didn't rush toward the door. Showing up didn't mean pushing forward. It meant staying. He remained there as the sky brightened, as nurses passed, as the hospital settled into its morning rhythm. The night had done its work. The truth had surfaced. Whitman no longer thought about the order he'd left behind in Wisconsin. It would be there when he returned. Right now, responsibility had placed him exactly where he needed to be. And he wasn't leaving. Zuri woke up in pieces, not all at once. First came sound, a steady rhythm, beeps spaced evenly enough to be calming, but constant enough to be impossible to ignore. Air moving through a vent, soft footsteps in the hallway, a distant voice that rose, then faded. Then came sensation, a dull ache in her shoulder, a tightness behind her eyes, a dryness in her throat like she'd swallowed sand. She tried to shift her hand and felt tape tug at her skin. Something attached to her, something monitoring her. Her eyelids fluttered. Light pressed through the haze. Zuri blinked slowly, the ceiling above her unfocused at first, then sharper. White tiles, a hospital fixture, a curtain rod. She swallowed and winced. Memory came next. The kitchen, the glass, the floor, and then Kofi. Her chest tightened instantly, panic rising before she could fully open her eyes. Kofi, she tried to say, but her voice came out rough, barely a sound. She swallowed again and forced the word through. Kofi. A chair scraped softly. A shadow shifted near the door. Zuri turned her head, slow and cautious, expecting a nurse, a doctor, anyone. But the face she saw froze her entire body. Whitman Hale, standing near the wall, like he didn't want to take up space. Hands at his sides, eyes fixed on her with a steadiness that felt unreal. For a moment, Zuri wondered if she was dreaming. The mind did strange things after fear. But Whitman didn't blur. He didn't fade. He didn't vanish. He looked older than the last time she'd seen him, not dramatically, just softened around the edges, less polished in a way that made him feel more human than memory had allowed. He took one small step forward, then stopped, as if waiting for permission. Zuri, he said quietly. Her breath caught. Shock hit first, not loud, not expressive, just a full-body stillness, like her system had paused to reassess reality. Then fear followed, sharp and immediate. Why is he here? What did he learn? Where is Kofi? Her fingers curled against the sheet. Whitman didn't rush her. I'm here, he said, voice low. You're safe. Kofi is safe. Zuri's eyes stung instantly. Kofi? She rasped. Whitman nodded. He's okay. He's with staff. He's been incredibly brave. The tears came faster than she could stop them, sliding down her cheeks without permission. Relief didn't feel gentle. It felt like collapse, like something she had been holding up for years finally released. She turned her face slightly, embarrassed by how quickly her composure broke. Whitman didn't comment on it. He reached toward the small table beside the bed where a cup of water sat, hesitated, then looked at her. Can you drink? He asked. Zuri nodded faintly. He poured a little into a plastic cup with a lid and a straw, then held it near her mouth carefully, giving her control. She sipped slowly, throat burning, breathing easing. When she finished, Whitman set it back down and returned to stillness. Zuri stared at him again, searching his face for anger. There was none. Searching for accusation. There was none. Only a quiet presence that made her feel exposed in a way she hadn't felt in years. How? She tried, voice still rough. Whitman answered gently. Kofi called me. Her heart stopped for a beat. What? She whispered. Whitman didn't flinch. He called me. He said you wouldn't wake up. Zuri closed her eyes. She saw it instantly. Kofi in the kitchen, small hands shaking, reaching for the purse, unfolding the card. The number. Her stomach twisted. Oh, God, she breathed. Whitman stepped closer again, just a little. He did exactly what you taught him to do. Zuri's eyes opened again, wide now. You spoke to him, she said. Yes, you. She struggled to sit up, panic returning. You said his name? Whitman nodded once. He told me. Zuri's hands trembled under the sheet. Whitman spoke before she could spiral into fear. He's okay. He's not hurt. He's not alone. He's been asking about you. Zuri's face crumpled again. I wasn't there. Whitman shook his head. You prepared him. That's why he handled it. Zuri stared at the ceiling, blinking rapidly to hold herself together. Her mind raced through questions faster than she could speak them. What did Kofi say? Did he ask about his father? Did he call Whitman sir like he did everyone? Did he sound scared? And then the question she didn't want to ask, but had to. Where is he right now? Zuri whispered. Whitman glanced toward the door, right down the hall. A nurse is with him. He's calm. He's been watching the clock. Zuri turned her head toward Whitman again. Bring him, she said, voice firm despite the weakness in it. Please. Whitman nodded immediately, but he didn't move right away. Instead, he asked, Are you in pain? Zuri swallowed. I'm fine. Whitman's eyes held hers, not arguing, just waiting. Zuri exhaled. My shoulder hurts. My head feels heavy. But I'm here. That's what matters, Whitman said. Those words landed with unexpected weight. Zuri looked away, shame rising like heat, because she had worked so hard to prevent moments like this. So hard to keep everything stable, to keep Kofi from ever needing that number, and yet the moment had come anyway. Whitman stepped toward the door. "I'll get him," he said softly. "I'll be right back." He left, and the room felt too quiet again. Zuri stared at her hands, then at the hospital blanket, then at the corner of the room where the chair sat. Whitman had been there all night. That thought made her chest tighten. He could have ignored the call. He could have done what she had done, choose distance. But he came. Footsteps approached again. The door opened. Kofi appeared first, small and careful, as if the hospital air made him unsure. His eyes went immediately to the bed. "Mama," he breathed. Zuri's face broke open. "Kofi," she said, voice cracking. "Baby, come here." He ran to her, climbing carefully onto the chair, and then leaning into her arms as best he could without touching the machines. Zuri wrapped her arms around him, careful but desperate, pressing her cheek to his hair. "I'm sorry," she whispered into him. "I'm so sorry." Kofi shook his head quickly. "You're awake." "That's right," she said, holding him. "I'm awake." He pulled back just enough to look at her face. "I called the number like you said." Zuri swallowed hard. "You did so good." "I didn't cry," he said, almost like he needed her to know. Zuri's eyes filled again. "You were so brave." Kofi nodded, then glanced behind him. Whitman stood near the door again, giving space, not stepping forward. But his presence filled the room anyway. Kofi looked between them, confusion flickering across his face, not panic, just curiosity. "Is he the number?" Kofi asked softly. Zuri went still. Her grip tightened around Kofi's hand. Whitman didn't speak. He let Zuri lead. Zuri's throat tightened until speaking felt impossible. She looked into Kofi's face, the same face she had kissed goodnight 1,000 times, the same face she had promised stability. And now, in the most fragile moment of their lives, her past was standing in the doorway. "Yes," she whispered. "He's the number." Kofi blinked, processing. Then he asked the question Zuri had feared for years. "Is he my dad?" Zuri's breath caught. Whitman's posture shifted slightly, not forward, not aggressive, just attentive, ready to listen. Zuri stared at her son, heart pounding, and for the first time in 5 years, she realized she could not protect him from the truth by hiding it. Not anymore. The question hung between them, not loud, not demanding, just present. "Is he my dad?" Kofi's voice was calm, almost curious, the way children ask questions when they trust the adults around them to tell the truth. Zuri felt the weight of it press into her chest. For years, she had rehearsed answers she never planned to give. She had practiced silence the way some people practice speeches, carefully, consistently, with intention. Silence had been her shield. Silence had been how she kept her world from splitting into parts she couldn't manage. But silence could not live in this room anymore. Not with Kofi's hand in hers. Not with Whitman standing there, waiting without pushing. Zuri swallowed, her throat tight, her heart working harder than her body wanted to allow. "Yes," she said quietly. "He is." Kofi didn't react the way she had feared. He didn't cry. He didn't pull away. He didn't panic. He just looked at Whitman again. "Oh," he said. Whitman met his gaze without hesitation. He didn't smile. He didn't rush forward. He stayed exactly where he was, steady, open, present. "Hi, Kofi," Whitman said softly. "I'm glad you called me." Kofi nodded once, accepting that as fact. Then he turned back to Zuri. "You didn't tell me," he said, not accusing, just noticing. Zuri closed her eyes briefly. "No," she admitted. "I didn't." "Why?" Kofi asked. The simplicity of the question broke something open in her. She looked at her son, then past him to Whitman, then back again. She tightened her grip on Kofi's hand, grounding herself in the warmth of it. "I need you to listen," she said gently. "And I need you to know that everything I did because I love you." Kofi nodded again. "Okay." Zuri took a breath. "When I found out I was going to have you," she began, "I was scared." Whitman didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even shift his weight. He listened. "I wasn't scared of you," Zuri continued. "I was scared of the world you'd be born into. Kofi frowned slightly. The world? Yes, she said, because the world doesn't treat everyone the same, and I needed to be sure that wherever you grew, you would never feel like you didn't belong. She looked up at Whitman now, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since waking. I didn't know how to make space for both of our worlds without putting you in the middle, she said, voice steady but soft. And I didn't want my fear to become your confusion. Whitman absorbed her words without expression. His jaw remained relaxed. His eyes didn't harden. I didn't want him to feel like an exception, Zuri continued, or like he had to explain himself, or like love came with conditions he didn't understand. Kofi's brow furrowed deeper. Did I do something wrong? Zuri shook her head quickly. No, never. You did nothing wrong. This was about me making choices before you ever had to carry them. She turned her body slightly toward Whitman, still keeping Kofi close. I didn't tell you because I was afraid of difference, she said. Not of you as a person, but of what our lives would ask of him together. Whitman nodded once, slowly. I know the world you come from, Zuri said, and I know the one I come from. I didn't want my son standing between them without roots. Her voice trembled now, but she didn't stop. I didn't want him learning how to shrink himself to be accepted. I didn't want him growing up watching me explain his existence to people who didn't deserve access to it. Kofi leaned into her side. Zuri kissed the top of his head and continued. So I chose certainty, she said. I chose community. I chose to build a world around him that would never question his worth. Whitman took that in without defense. I didn't tell you because I didn't trust myself not to doubt, Zuri admitted. And I couldn't afford doubt when it came to him. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of hospital equipment. Whitman spoke for the first time since the confession began. You didn't think I would show up, he said, not accusing, just clarifying. Zuri shook her head. I thought you would. I was afraid of what showing up would cost him. Whitman nodded again. I was afraid of what difference would demand, Zuri continued. And I didn't want him paying for decisions made before he could speak. Kofi looked between them again. You didn't want me to be confused, he said. Yes, Zuri replied immediately. I wanted your world to feel whole. Whitman stayed silent. He didn't justify himself. He didn't explain his past. He didn't reclaim anything. He listened. Zuri felt tears sliding again, but she didn't wipe them away. I carried everything alone, she said, not because I thought I had to, but because I believed it was the safest way. She met Whitman's eyes fully now. I never asked you to choose, she said. And that was wrong. Whitman exhaled slowly. I should have told you, Zuri continued. You deserved the truth. He deserved the truth. But I didn't know how to give it without risking the stability I worked so hard to build. Kofi shifted in the chair. Did you love him? He asked suddenly, nodding toward Whitman. Zuri paused. Yes, she said. I did. Whitman didn't look away. And you still do? Kofi asked. Zuri considered the question honestly. I care, she said. Very much. Kofi nodded, satisfied for now. Whitman finally spoke again, his voice measured, controlled, but gentle. You were protecting him, he said. Yes, Zuri replied. In the only way I knew how. Whitman absorbed that. I wasn't angry, Zuri added quickly. I was afraid of difference, afraid of systems I couldn't control, afraid of asking my child to live in between. Whitman didn't counter her fear. He acknowledged it. I understand, he said quietly. Zuri looked at him, searching his face for resentment. There was none. I can't change the years that passed, Whitman continued. But I'm here now, and I'm listening. That was when Zuri broke, not loudly, not dramatically. She cried the way people cry when holding back is no longer required. Kofi wrapped his arms around her, pressing his cheek to her shoulder. It's okay, Mama, he said. I'm okay. Zuri laughed through tears. You're too grown for 5. Whitman watched them, something heavy settling into resolve. He didn't interrupt the moment. He waited. When Zuri finally calmed, she looked at Whitman again. I don't know what comes next, she said honestly. I don't know how to undo 5 years. Whitman shook his head. We don't undo, we build forward. She nodded slowly. I don't want him confused, she said. I don't want him pulled apart. Whitman answered without hesitation. Then we don't pull him. We stand beside him. Kofi looked up. Together? Whitman met his gaze. Together. The words settled into the room like a promise, Not loud, not rushed, just real. Recovery did not feel like relief. It felt like adjustment. Zuri remained in the hospital for observation, her body recovering in measured steps rather than dramatic leaps. The doctor spoke in careful language, explaining timelines, limitations, expectations. Zuri listened, asked questions, nodded. Whitman stood beside the bed, not hovering, not withdrawing, just present. They didn't hold hands. They didn't revisit the past again. They didn't speak about romance at all. What they spoke about was Kofi. What does his morning look like? Whitman asked one afternoon, sitting in the chair near the window. Zuri shifted slightly against the pillows. He wakes up early, likes to sit quietly before school. He eats eggs if he can help cook them. Whitman nodded, committing it to memory. Does he take the bus? Yes. I walk him to the stop. Who picks him up when you're working late? Auntie Nia, sometimes my cousin. Whitman didn't question those arrangements. He didn't offer alternatives. He simply learned them. That was the tone they set. When Kofi visited, the room felt fuller. He brought his book bag, his drawings, his questions. He climbed carefully onto the bed, mindful of wires and monitors. You're not allowed to lift me, he reminded Zuri seriously. She smiled. I know. Whitman watched from a respectful distance, observing how Zuri spoke to her son. Direct, calm, always explaining without overloading. She doesn't rush you, Whitman said once, after Kofi had stepped into the hallway with a nurse. Zuri glanced at him. I don't want him learning that love feels urgent. Whitman absorbed that. That evening, after Kofi had gone home with Auntie Nia, Whitman remained behind. We should talk logistics, Zuri said, voice steady. Yes, Whitman agreed immediately. They discussed school schedules, medical follow-ups, transportation, how often Whitman would be in Chicago versus Wisconsin. No assumptions were made. No demands offered. I don't want him overwhelmed, Zuri said. This is already a lot. Whitman nodded. I'll follow your lead. She met his eyes. This isn't about control. I know, he replied. It's about consistency. That earned him a long look. When Zuri was discharged, Whitman helped carry her bag but let her walk at her own pace. He didn't insist on staying overnight. He arranged a nearby hotel instead. I'll be close, he said, but I won't crowd. Zuri appreciated that more than she said. The first weeks after the hospital passed slowly. Whitman attended school meetings quietly, sitting beside Zuri rather than across from her. He introduced himself simply. I'm Kofi's father. No qualifiers, no explanation. At home, he learned routines. How Kofi liked his cereal dry first, then milk. How he needed reminders, but not pressure. How he asked questions in layers, returning to topics days later when he felt ready. Whitman adjusted without complaint, Zuri noticed. One evening, while Kofi colored at the table, Whitman asked, Do you want me to help with bedtime? Zuri considered it. You can read. Kofi looked up immediately. You read good? Whitman smiled faintly. I'll try. He read slowly, carefully, letting Kofi interrupt, letting him correct pronunciations, letting him lead. Zuri watched from the doorway. There was no performance in it, no trying to impress, just learning. After Kofi fell asleep, Zuri and Whitman sat in the living room, silence stretching comfortably between them. This doesn't have to mean anything else, Zuri said finally. Whitman nodded. I know. I don't want confusion. Neither do I. They didn't define the future. They didn't revisit the past. They focused on the present, co-parenting first, respect before romance. And in that careful rebuilding, something solid began to form, not from urgency but from intention. If Zuri and Whitman were careful steps forward, Kofi was motion. Not rushed, not reckless, just natural. Children didn't overthink the way adults did. They didn't rehearse history or weigh future outcomes before asking a question. They noticed what was present and responded to it honestly. Kofi noticed that Whitman showed up. At first it was small things. Whitman arrived at the apartment at the same time every Wednesday afternoon. Shoes placed neatly by the door, jacket folded over his arm. He greeted Zuri with a nod, never assuming familiarity, and knelt to Kofi's level before saying hello. Hey, he'd say. How was school? Kofi answered differently each time. Sometimes detailed, sometimes brief. Whitman accepted both. One afternoon, Kofi dragged his backpack across the floor and dumped its contents out. I have a project, he announced. Zuri looked up from the counter. What kind? A map? Whitman leaned closer. Of what? Where people live, Kofi said seriously. Whitman studied the paper. That's a big topic. Kofi grinned. I know. They sat at the table together, crayons spread out between them. Whitman didn't take over. He asked questions. Where do you want this road to go? Here. Okay. What's next to it? A park. Good idea. Zuri watched from the kitchen, hands resting on the counter. There was no tension in the room, no careful choreography, just presence. The first time Kofi reached for Whitman's hand happened without ceremony. They were crossing the street near the bus stop, traffic moving steadily. Zuri stood on one side, Whitman on the other. Kofi hesitated, then reached for Whitman instinctively. Whitman felt it immediately, the small weight, the trust implied in the motion. He didn't stiffen. He didn't look to Zuri for permission. He held on. They crossed together. Later that night, after Kofi was asleep, Zuri said quietly, he doesn't do that with everyone. Whitman nodded. I know. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It built in moments like these, in shared routines, in repeated presence, in listening without correcting. Kofi tested boundaries the way children did, not maliciously but curiously. Why do you talk so slow? He asked Whitman one evening. Whitman smiled. So people can understand me. Kofi considered that. Mama talks fast. Zuri laughed. I do not. Whitman didn't comment. He let the exchange stand. Another day, Kofi asked, do you live far? Whitman answered honestly, a few hours. Why? Because my work is there. Can you move? Whitman paused, choosing his words carefully. Not right now. Kofi nodded. Okay. There was no disappointment in his voice. Just information processed and filed away. One Saturday morning, Whitman arrived early, before breakfast. Zuri opened the door, surprised. Everything okay? She asked. Yes, Whitman replied. I wanted to see if Kofi wanted to help me cook. From the living room, Kofi perked up. Cook what? Pancakes, Whitman said. Kofi's eyes widened. With syrup? Yes. Kofi was in the kitchen instantly. The process was messy. Flour on the counter, batter on Kofi's sleeve. Whitman moved slower than necessary, letting Kofi pour and stir, even when it meant extra cleanup. Flip it, Kofi instructed. Whitman did, the pancake landing slightly off-center. Good job, Kofi declared. Zuri leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching the scene unfold. This wasn't replacement. This wasn't competition. This was connection. Later that afternoon, while Zuri rested, Whitman took Kofi to the park. He stayed close, but didn't hover. He pushed the swing when asked. He counted out loud during a game of tag. When it was time to leave, Kofi protested briefly, then complied. You're coming back, right? He asked. Yes, Whitman replied. On Wednesday. Kofi nodded, satisfied. That night, Zuri tucked Kofi into bed. Did you have fun? She asked. Yes, he said. He listens. Zuri smiled softly. That matters. As weeks passed, trust formed in layers. Kofi began to share small worries with Whitman. Things he didn't feel. Urgent enough to bring to his mother, but still needed a voice. I don't like reading out loud in class, he said once, swinging his legs from the couch. Why? Whitman asked. Because people listen. Whitman considered that. Do you like reading when no one's watching? Yes. Then it's not the reading, Whitman said gently. It's the watching. Kofi thought about that. Yeah. Whitman didn't offer solutions. He didn't tell him to be brave. He just named the feeling. Zuri noticed the shift. Kofi didn't cling to Whitman. He didn't pull away from her either. He moved between them comfortably, without tension, without loyalty tests. One evening, during dinner, Kofi announced, I have 2 grown-ups now. Zuri froze briefly. Whitman stayed still. Kofi continued, unfazed. Mama and Whitman. Zuri exhaled slowly. Yes. Whitman nodded. That's right. Kofi smiled. That's good. That was how the bridge formed. Not through explanations, not through labels, but through steady presence that didn't demand allegiance. Bestie, if this story is touching you, share it with someone who believes showing up matters. Because what Kofi showed them, without realizing it, was that trust doesn't need to be negotiated. It grows when people show up the same way, again and again. And in the space between two careful adults, a child built something strong enough to carry them both forward. The discovery did not come with drama. No raised voices. No confrontation. No moment designed for spectacle. It came quietly, exactly the way Zuri Okafor had lived the last 5 years of her life. Whitman found the folder on a Tuesday afternoon. He had stopped by the apartment earlier than usual, carrying groceries, because Zuri's shoulders still limited what she could lift comfortably. Kofi was at school. The apartment was quiet, sunlight resting across the living room floor. Zuri was in the bedroom, resting. Whitman moved through the kitchen with practiced care, putting items away where Zuri had shown him they belonged. He didn't rearrange. He didn't optimize. He followed the system she had already built. When he opened the lower cabinet to place canned goods inside, his hand brushed against something stiff. A manila folder. It was tucked behind a stack of old notebooks, intentionally out of sight but not hidden enough to be lost. Whitman paused. He didn't open it right away. Privacy mattered to him. Boundaries mattered. He had learned that from Zuri. But the folder wasn't sealed. A label peeked out from the edge, typed, neat, unmistakably official. He recognized the formatting instantly. Legal. Whitman set the groceries aside and carefully slid the folder out, resting it on the counter without opening it yet. He stood there for a moment, debating. Then he saw his name, Whitman Hale, typed clearly. Once, then again. He opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents he had never seen, but should have. Forms acknowledging paternity without assignment of financial obligation. Signed statements declining formal support. Affidavits confirming sole guardianship. Dates. Signatures. Zuri's signature, steady, unmistakable, appeared again and again. Whitman's chest tightened. This wasn't avoidance. This wasn't indecision. This was strategy. He read every page carefully, understanding the intent behind each one. Zuri had consulted legal counsel early, before Kofi was born. She had structured everything to ensure Whitman's future would remain untouched. No claims, no filings, no records that would surface later to complicate his life. She had protected him, legally, deliberately, without asking for acknowledgement. Whitman sat down at the kitchen table, the folder still open in front of him. His hands rested flat on the surface, grounding himself as the truth settled. Zuri had not sought support. Not financial. Not legal. Not social. She had refused avenues available to her, not out of pride, but out of foresight. She had ensured that if Whitman ever chose to be involved, it would be because he wanted to be, not because he was obligated. And if he never did, his life would remain uninterrupted. Whitman closed the folder gently. Footsteps sounded down the hallway. Zuri appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but steadily. She stopped when she saw the folder on the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Zuri sighed quietly. "You found it," she said. Whitman looked up at her. "Yes." She walked closer and sat across from him, lowering herself carefully into the chair. "I wasn't hiding it," she said. "I just didn't bring it out." Whitman nodded. "I know." Zuri folded her hands together. "I didn't want your life disrupted by something you didn't consent to." Whitman absorbed that. "You protected me," he said. Zuri's lips pressed together. "I protected choice." She met his eyes directly. "I didn't want resentment anywhere near my son." Whitman leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly. "You never filed for support," he said. "No," Zuri replied. "You could have." "Yes, but you didn't." Zuri didn't look away. "I didn't want him thinking he was leverage." The words hit him harder than anything else in the folder. Whitman nodded once. "I didn't want him growing up hearing adults argue over responsibility," Zuri continued. "I wanted him knowing he was wanted, not claimed." Whitman's voice was steady when he spoke again. "You took everything on yourself." Zuri didn't deny it. "I chose it." There was no bitterness in her tone, no martyrdom, just truth. "I didn't want your future compromised by decisions made in fear," she said. "And I didn't want my son learning that love arrives through paperwork." Whitman sat with that for a long moment. "You protected my name," he said quietly. "My career, my standing." Zuri nodded. "You didn't deserve damage for a situation you weren't aware of." Whitman looked down at the folder again. She had protected him without credit, without acknowledgement, without expectation of return. That kind of protection carried weight. He closed the folder fully and slid it toward her. "I didn't know," he said. "I know." Whitman's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with resolve forming. "You made it possible for me to walk away untouched," he said. Zuri's voice softened. "That was the point." Whitman shook his head slowly. "And yet, here I am." Zuri studied him carefully. "Yes." He looked up at her again. "You didn't ask me to choose." "No, but you gave me the cleanest choice possible." Zuri nodded once. The room fell quiet again, not tense, not awkward, heavy with realization. Whitman finally spoke. "I won't pretend I understand everything you carried," he said. "But I understand this." He tapped the folder gently. "You didn't protect yourself. You protected me." Zuri looked down at her hands. "I protected my son." Whitman stood slowly. "This changes how I see the last 5 years," he said. Zuri didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "It shouldn't obligate you." Whitman met her eyes. "It doesn't," he replied. "It clarifies me." Whitman did not decide immediately, not because he was unsure, but because the kind of choice in front of him deserved intention, not impulse. He left Zuri's apartment that evening carrying more than the folder he'd returned to its place. He carried clarity that unsettled the order he'd relied on for most of his life. Control had always allowed him to choose timing. Responsibility removed that privilege. For the first time, Whitman understood that showing up quietly was no longer enough. Some things required being named. The following morning, Whitman sat in his car outside Kofi's school. In Chicago, engine off, watching parents gather near the entrance. Backpacks bounced, conversations overlapped. Children ran ahead, confident their adults were close behind. Zuri stood near the gate, shoulders still stiff, posture protective but relaxed. Kofi held her hand, talking animatedly about a spelling quiz. Whitman stepped out of the car. He didn't rush toward them. He walked at a steady pace, visible, intentional. Zuri noticed first. Her body shifted slightly, not alarmed, just attentive. Kofi turned next, his face lighting up when he saw Whitman. "You came early," Kofi said. "Yes," Whitman replied. "I wanted to walk you in." Zuri studied Whitman's face. "Everything okay?" "Yes," he said. "I'd like to say something." Parents nearby glanced over, curiosity mild but present. Whitman didn't mind. He knelt in front of Kofi, level with him. "This doesn't change anything about today," Whitman said gently. "You still go to school, you still come home, but I want you to hear this from me." Kofi listened, serious now. "I'm your father," Whitman said, "and I'm not going anywhere." Kofi blinked once, then he nodded. "Okay, no fanfare, no shock, just acceptance." Whitman stood and turned slightly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the adults nearby, teachers, parents, people who would remember. "My name is Whitman Hale," he said evenly. "I'm Kofi's father. I'm involved, and I will continue to be." Zuri's breath caught. This wasn't performance. This was acknowledgement. Whitman wasn't reclaiming anything. He was assuming responsibility openly. A teacher approached, smiling politely. "Nice to meet you," she said. "We're glad Kofi has support." Whitman nodded. "So am I." Zuri didn't speak until Kofi had gone inside. Then she turned to Whitman, eyes searching his face. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes," Whitman replied. "I did." They walked back toward the sidewalk together, silence stretching between them, not tense but heavy with meaning. Later that day, Whitman made calls to his legal advisor, not to undo the paperwork, but to align future steps with transparency. To his employer, to adjust his schedule, no excuses offered, no details withheld. "My priorities have changed," he said simply. That evening he sat with Zuri at the kitchen table, a notepad between them. "I'm not asking for control," he said. "I'm asking for structure we agree on." Zuri nodded slowly. "That matters." He pointed to the page. School, healthcare, travel, time. They worked through each item carefully. No raised voices, no urgency, just alignment. "This isn't about fixing the past," Whitman said. "It's about being present going forward." Zuri studied him for a long moment. "You understand that this isn't easy," she said. "I do. And you're still choosing it." "Yes." That was the private commitment, not declared loudly, not written down, but lived. Later that night, Kofi asked from his bed, "Are you coming tomorrow?" Yes, Whitman said. And next week? Yes. Kofi smiled. Good. Whitman turned off the light and stepped back. In the living room, Zuri waited. You made it public, she said softly. Whitman met her gaze. I made it honest. Zuri nodded. This was the twist neither of them expected. Not a demand, not a confrontation, but a man choosing visibility after being protected by invisibility. Whitman didn't ask for credit. He didn't reference the paperwork again. He simply showed up, openly, consistently, without condition. And in doing so, he made the only choice that mattered. The new normal did not announce itself. It arrived quietly, through repetition. On a Tuesday morning, sunlight filled Zuri's kitchen in a way it hadn't before. Not brighter, not warmer, just different, because more people were awake to see it. The table held 3 plates instead of 2. 3 chairs pulled close enough to touch. Whitman stood at the stove, sleeves rolled neatly, moving with the same calm precision he brought to everything else. Eggs sizzled lightly in the pan. Kofi sat at the table, feet swinging, reading the back of a cereal box aloud. Did you know, Kofi said, that this cereal has 12 vitamins? Whitman glanced over his shoulder. That's a lot of responsibility for one bowl. Kofi laughed. I know. Zuri leaned against the counter, mug in hand, watching the scene unfold. There was no tension in her shoulders, no scanning for disruption, just observation. Breakfast had become shared, not every day, not forced, but often enough to matter. Whitman set plates down carefully. Eggs first, he said. Cereal after. Kofi grinned. You're learning. Zuri smiled into her cup. After breakfast, routines moved forward without discussion. Kofi grabbed his backpack. Zuri checked his homework. Whitman tied his shoes, once too loose, then corrected after Kofi pointed it out. I like them tight, Kofi said seriously. Whitman nodded. Good to know. They walked together to the bus stop, the same route Zuri had taken for years. Neighbors noticed. Not with judgment, but curiosity. Zuri nodded politely. Whitman returned greetings with equal respect. No explanations were offered. Presence did the work. At church on Sunday, Zuri introduced Whitman the same way she introduced anyone else who mattered. This is Whitman, she said. He's family. No qualifier followed. Whitman stood beside her, hands folded, listening as the service unfolded. Kofi leaned against his side when his attention drifted, trusting the familiar warmth. Afterward, Auntie Nia approached with a smile that held both welcome and scrutiny. So, she said, arms crossed loosely, you're the one. Whitman met her gaze evenly. I am. Nia studied him for a long moment. Good, she said finally. Then you already know. Showing up matters. Yes, Whitman replied. I do. Community did not push Whitman away. It assessed him. Watched how he listened more than he spoke. Noticed how he deferred to Zuri's lead. Observed how he corrected Kofi gently without diminishing him. Trust wasn't automatic, but it grew. At school events, Whitman stood where Zuri stood. He didn't take over conversations. He didn't explain their story unless asked. When he was asked, he answered simply, I'm Kofi's father. Nothing more, nothing less. Zuri noticed how he never tried to replace her world with his own. He didn't suggest changes that erased what already worked. He asked before adjusting. He learned names. He respected routines. One evening, as Zuri folded laundry, Whitman sat across from her on the couch, helping sort socks. You don't have to do this, she said. I want to, he replied. She watched him pair Kofi's mismatched socks carefully, not correcting the choice. You don't try to change him, she said. Whitman looked up. Why would I? That was the point. Love arrived without erasure. Zuri remained who she was. She still worked hard, still leaned on community, still spoke directly. Whitman didn't soften her edges. He respected them. Kofi noticed too. Mama, he said one night while brushing his teeth, you don't look tired like before. Zuri paused. I still get tired, but not all the way, he said. She considered that. Maybe that's because help doesn't mean weakness. Kofi nodded, satisfied. As weeks turned into months, the household settled into rhythm. Whitman didn't move in, not yet. He stayed close, present, reliable. Zuri didn't rush answers about the future. She didn't need to. They were building something sustainable, not impressive. One Saturday morning, they all sat at the table working on a puzzle. Pieces spread everywhere. Kofi directed the process with confidence. "This one goes here," he said, handing a piece to Whitman. Whitman placed it carefully. "You're right." Zuri watched, a quiet warmth settling into her chest. This was the new normal, not perfect, not dramatic, but honest, and it held. The ending did not arrive with a grand moment. It came in a quiet afternoon, the kind that used to pass unnoticed. Zuri sat at the kitchen table helping Kofi with his reading. Sunlight rested on the pages, warming the space between them. Whitman stood near the window, reviewing notes for work, occasionally glancing over when Kofi stumbled on a word. "Take your time," Whitman said gently. Kofi tried again, slower this time, then smiled when he got it right. Zuri reached over and squeezed his hand. "See, you already knew it." Whitman closed his notebook and set it aside. "I should head out," he said. "I'll be back Friday." Kofi looked up. "For dinner?" "Yes," Whitman replied. "And Saturday?" "Yes." Kofi nodded, reassured. There was no question in his voice anymore. No need for confirmation layered with fear. Presence had replaced uncertainty. Whitman slipped on his jacket, paused near the door, then turned back to Zuri. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For trusting me to stay." Zuri considered that. "I didn't trust easily," she said. "You earned it." Whitman accepted that without argument. He left, the door closing softly behind him. Zuri returned her attention to Kofi. "Ready for dinner?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Can we make it together?" She smiled. "Always." They cooked side by side, talking about school, about a field trip coming up, about a question Kofi had been holding on to all week. "Mama," he said as he stirred, "do you think everyone has help?" Zuri paused. "Not everyone, but everyone should." Kofi nodded thoughtfully. "I think help is important." "So do I," she replied. That night, after Kofi was asleep, Zuri sat alone for a while. She didn't feel heavy. She didn't feel relieved. She felt settled. Her phone buzzed with a message. "Whitman, home safe. See you Friday." She typed back, "Zuri, drive carefully." No extra words. No promises attached. They didn't need them. Weeks later, Whitman stood in the school auditorium, watching Kofi walk across the small stage for an end-of-term presentation. Zuri sat beside him, hands folded, eyes bright. Kofi scanned the crowd, spotted them, and waved enthusiastically. Whitman raised his hand in response. Zuri laughed softly. When the presentation ended, Kofi ran straight toward them. "Did you see me?" he asked. "Yes," Whitman replied. "You were great." Zuri nodded. "So proud." Kofi beamed. As they walked back to the car, Kofi skipped ahead, humming to himself. Zuri watched him, heart steady. "This feels right," she said. Whitman nodded. "It does." They didn't discuss labels. They didn't outline timelines. They didn't need to decide what the future would look like to appreciate what the present had become. That night, Zuri tucked Kofi into bed. "I love you forever," she whispered. "Love you always," he replied, then added, "and tell Whitman good night." She smiled. "I will." In the living room, Whitman stood by the window again, jacket already on. "Good night," Zuri said. "Good night," he replied. They stood there for a moment, the quiet comfortable, earned. When Whitman left, Zuri didn't watch the door with worry. She turned off the lights, walked down the hallway, and paused outside Kofi's room to listen to his breathing. Steady, calm, safe. That was how the story ended. Not with everything tied into a perfect bow, but with peace, with truth spoken, with responsibility accepted, with love that showed up and stayed. This story did not begin with answers. It began with a child who knew how to ask for help. That is where the lesson lives. Because long before the phone rang at 2:47 a.m., a mother had already made a choice to teach her son that fear was not a signal to hide, but a signal to reach out. She taught him that being prepared was not the same as being afraid. She taught him that asking for help was not weakness, but wisdom. And that lesson saved a life. Kofi did not become brave in that moment. He had been brave already, trained quietly, patiently, lovingly, not through warnings or panic, but through practice, through repetition, through trust. That is the first truth this story leaves us with. Teaching children how to ask for help saves lives. Not someday, not hypothetically, in real moments, in ordinary homes, on nights that begin like any other. The second truth is one many people struggle to accept. Strength does not mean doing everything alone. Zuri was strong. She was capable. She was disciplined. But she was never meant to carry everything by herself forever. Community did not weaken her. It held her. Support did not erase her independence. It sustained it. When Whitman showed up, he did not replace her strength. He joined it. When Auntie Nia stepped in, she did not diminish Zuri's role. She reinforced it. When teachers, nurses, neighbors, and family formed a circle around Kofi, no one lost their place. Strength multiplied. That is the second lesson. Strength includes community. The third truth is quieter, but just as powerful. Truth delayed is still powerful. Zuri's silence came from fear, not cruelty. Whitman's absence came from respect, not indifference. Years were lost, yes, but when the truth finally arrived, it still had the power to heal instead of destroy. Because truth does not expire, it waits. And when it arrives with humility instead of accusation, it builds instead of burns. The fourth lesson is one we don't talk about enough. Showing up changes generations. Whitman could have stayed distant. He could have remained private. He could have accepted protection without responsibility. Instead, he chose visibility. He chose consistency. He chose to be known. Not loudly, not performatively, but daily, repeatedly, reliably. That choice did not just change his life. It changed Kofi's understanding of what men do when things are hard. It changed Zuri's understanding of what partnership can look like without control. It changed the future. And that brings us to the final truth, one that ties everything together. One call can rewrite a family line, not because the call itself was magical, but because of what came before it and what followed after. Preparation before the crisis, presence after the truth, commitment without erasure. This story was never about perfection. It was about alignment. It was about responsibility arriving late and still being honored. It was about love that did not need to announce itself loudly to be real. It was about a child who trusted the adults around him enough to speak up, and adults who listened. Bestie, if this story moved you, pause for a moment and reflect. Who taught you how to ask for help? Who showed up when they didn't have to? Who carried you through moments you didn't understand until later? Now it's your turn. Like this story, if it reminded you that love shows up in actions, comment your biggest lesson from this journey. We read every single one. Subscribe to Harrison Love Stories, where love always shows up, truth always matters, and stories don't just entertain, they teach. Thank you for being here, bestie.